This is a measuring stick. This is also a measuring stick. We lost one of the greats this past week. Kevin Conroy, who was my Batman, passed away. He'll always be the Batman that all other Dark Knights are measured by. I put up this picture of him on my community section of the channel and saw this comment. West, Keaton, Kilmer, Clooney, Bale, Affleck, and Pattinson all played Batman. But Conroy was Batman, plain and simple. Which is why I wanted to do this video talking about actors who not only performed a role well, but put something else into it. Something intangible. I don't know if I'll be able to really explain it in words. It's kind of like trying to explain God to an atheist. Those who seek proof shall receive none. There are great performances, but then there are performances that seem so much more than that. More than an actor working for a paycheck or expressing himself in a creative and artistic manner. Sometimes an actor leaves something of themselves in a role, a very personal piece, and as an audience, we don't just see it, we feel it. Terry Funk once said, "I can't make you believe wrestling is real, but I can make you believe I'm real." That's what all the actors on this list did for me. In the setting of a fictional story with made-up sets, props, and CGI computer effects, they made me believe that the character had come to life. And because of the big personal piece of themselves they invested in the role, they'll always be the measuring stick for that character. Unfortunately, those characters are often trademarked by someone who doesn't fully appreciate that investment and just sees it as an actor playing a role. It's much more than that, though. And when an actor shares something that gets an audience to not only like the character, but love the character, that's something special, and that actor deserves a piece of that character forever. Here we go, in no particular order. Number 1, Kevin Conroy, Batman, and Bruce Wayne. I first knew him as Captain Rusty Wallace on Tour of Duty in 1987. It's not always the first actor to play a character that will always own it. Quite a few actors had already played the Dark Knight in live action as well as animation. Batman was a cool character. Dark, mysterious, cool costume, cool car, cool gadgets. Kevin Conroy was the one that finally gave Batman his soul, though. When playing any comic book character with a secret identity, it's incredibly challenging to play both parts well, since they're often polar opposites. Mr. Conroy gave Batman a quiet, steely intensity and controlled rage. He gave Bruce Wayne a gentleness, but not at the expense of sounding like a wimp. His Bruce Wayne was assured, confident, intelligent, not a pompous, rich blowhard like some eccentric billionaires can come off as in fiction. A billionaire that you could sit down and have a drink with and feel like you're actually talking to a human being who cares. We got to hear him in several different series and video games. My friend Sean Fuster put it best. He was perfect, and now he's gone. There will be many more actors who will portray the role of Batman and Bruce Wayne for years to come. I'm positive many of them will play Batman very well. I'm not as hopeful that any of them will be Batman, like Kevin Conroy was. I guess the joke's on the movie studio. Despite what trademarks say, some actors can take some things to the grave. Godspeed, Batman, and thank you. Number 2, Hugh Jackman, Wolverine. I couldn't get enough of X-Men comics in the early 90s, and one of my favorite characters was the old Knucklehead. Not just because he's a fellow countryman, but because he was so unlike any other superhero I'd seen before. He looked more like Clint Eastwood from a spaghetti western than a classic matinee movie idol. He wore spandex like everyone else, but seemed to do so begrudgingly, like he thought he looked ridiculous in it. He smoked a big stogie in it, and he wasn't clean-shaven. He wore it at a protest and seemed more comfortable in his cowboy boots and hat, jeans, flannel shirt, and leather jacket. He had claws, a metal skeleton, and accelerated healing, which basically made him a Terminator. When he first appeared on the animated series in 1992, he sounded exactly like I imagined. When the live-action movie came out in 2000, I was hoping that, if nothing else, they at least get Wolverine right. Well, he wasn't right. He was perfect. And we almost didn't get him. The role originally went to Doug Gray Scott, who was working on Mission Impossible 2. And because of delays on that film, a recast had to be made after X-Men had already started shooting. Russell Crowe had been originally offered the role, who turned it down but suggested they look at his fellow Aussie, Hugh Jackman. When it came time to do a last-minute recast, Jackman was in the right place at the right time. and he got the role. I remember first seeing him in the trailer and, without even hearing him, thinking, they got it. He looks like a young Clint Eastwood. When the movie came out, my hunch was confirmed. Rather than taking the role and making it his own, he used the same perfect voice and cadence from the animated series. Yeah, he was too tall for the role, but he never plays tall. He's not a booming presence. He's suspicious, feral, always on edge, intensity personified. Wolverine isn't just damaged. He's destroyed, and healed, and destroyed 1,000 times over. He has the weight of 1,000 horrific demises on him, and too many wars.
Too many wars.
And he's come to a place where he's always on high alert, while at the same time just over it all. We've been lucky enough to see him in many films, and Mr. Jackman isn't big time enough to say no to small cameos.
Excuse me, I'm Eric Lensher.
Charles Xavier.
Go f*** yourself.
Or a what-if variant tale of the character's demise. Luckily, the ultra-depressing 2017 Logan movie isn't going to be a swan song for playing the character, though. He deserves better than that. We'll be seeing the real Wolverine one more time in the upcoming Deadpool movie, thanks to Ryan Reynolds' never-ending insistence on a do-over from the X-Men Origins Wolverine movie.
Hey, Hugh, you want to play Wolverine one more time?
Yeah, sure, Ryan.
And after that, good luck to anyone who has to play the character when he steps aside. You've got some gigantic cowboy boots to fill, not to mention some heavy claws to pop. Number 3, Christopher Reeve, Superman and Clark Kent. Like the previous two, Mr. Reeve wasn't the first to play Superman, but he was the first to be Superman, and will always be the image that comes to mind when I think of the Man of Steel. Every actor who has or will play him can only hope to do a great impression of Christopher Reeve's Superman, much like Kevin Conroy's Batman. Reeve is the only one to perfectly portray both the hero as well as the mild-mannered alter ego of the character. As Superman, he's, well, Superman. Invincible, super strong, fast, he can fly. So much unlimited power, but that calming smile that says, don't worry, everything will be okay. As Clark, he's a bumbling putz and somehow downplays his 6'4" stature with his utter lack of confidence and coordination. I've always believed that posture is power, and the way he could transform from Clark to Superman simply by adjusting his posture is astounding. If anyone ever had any doubt as to whether it was all just an act, we got to see that Christopher Reeve was indeed the real-life Superman after his accident in 1995 that left him paralyzed from the neck down. He was always a symbol of grace, calmness, and hope. As Sean said, he was perfect, and now he's gone. I enjoy seeing glimpses of Reeve's Superman in performances by Brandon Routh and Henry Cavill, but there will always only be one Superman, and the best any subsequent actor playing the role will ever be able to do is follow Mr. Reeve's lead. Number 4, Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, The Incredible Hulk. What makes a Hulk great? It has a lot more to do with the man within the big green guy than you think. The rage of the Hulk doesn't work unless you have the logic and love of Banner within fighting to emerge. The Incredible Hulk was one of my favorite TV shows growing up, not just thanks to Lou Ferrigno being painted up green and smashing every piece of trash that deserved some instant karma, but because of the lonely man, Bill Bixby. Unfortunately, in Mr. Bixby's case, I don't think it was all acting. A few seasons into the show, his 6-year-old son passed away. I think it's then that Mr. Bixby truly became David Banner. It's the most unnatural thing a parent should have to endure, but he seemed to endure it with such courage. He had to be dying inside, though, fighting the rage that wanted to take him over at all times, fighting it with love of his memories. There's a sadness behind his eyes as David Banner that can't be performed. He kept on walking on with courage, and he did the best he could, and I think his best was the best Hulk we'll ever see put to screen. I don't know how much more I can say about Bill Bixby without getting emotionally worked up, so that's all I'll say. When the transformation occurred, Lou Ferrigno took over and smashed stuff real good. But more than that, he brought a childlike innocence and gentleness in flashes, wanting to get out. That's the secret to the Hulk. The Hulk doesn't want to be the Hulk. He doesn't want to exist. Being enraged and destroying things is wrong, even if it's so satisfying to see scumbags get their comeuppance. Mr. Ferrigno was so much more than some painted-up bodybuilder. He had the imposing physical stature, sure, but the man himself, Lou Ferrigno, is a quiet and sweet guy. He's kind of like that old saying, with great power comes great responsibility. Mr. Ferrigno could do some major damage with his muscles, but always presented himself as a thoughtful, intelligent, and happy guy. Not the typical choice for the Incredible Hulk, but the perfect one nonetheless. No bunch of computer pixels will ever come close. And the things I liked about Edward Norton and Mark Ruffalo as Banner were simply echoes of Bill Bixby. The Incredible Hulk truly did die with him. Number 5. Sean Connery, James Bond. Will we ever stop comparing new Bonds to Connery? Nope, because Sean Connery was James Bond. There can be different Bonds. At this point, with so many different actors having played him, you've got to try something different. But in the case of 007, they got it right the first time. Maybe it's time for someone to finally lean into it instead of trying to do the impossible. Do a full-on Connery impression. Give us what we've really been wanting for decades, another Connery Bond. And I'm not talking about this deep fake stuff with computer algorithm voice replacement. The deep fakes are neat, but it doesn't have legs. I loved seeing a young Luke on The Mandalorian, but I don't go back to it for multiple viewings because it's missing something. Soul. No matter how good they make it look and sound with a computer, computers will never be able to bring the spirit to a character like a real, living human being can. Number 6. Peter Cullen, Optimus Prime. Speaking of spirit, it's good old Uncle Pete. Sometimes a person you've watched your whole life can feel like family, even if you've never actually met them. Like Uncle George or Auntie Carrie from Star Wars. They just bring something to your life that's very familial, which is especially nice if you don't have a lot of family. A reassurance that everything will be okay. Peter Cullen was, is, and always will be Optimus Prime. His commanding tenor, coupled with compassion and gentleness, make him the ultimate hero in TV and movies for me. And I think it's a disgrace that he had to audition for the first live-action movie, competing against other actors for a role that he made so special by putting a piece of himself and his brother into. This clip recently came out, and it kind of hurts my soul to hear it.
They're starting to do Optimus Prime with other people, and it hurts. You know, it hurts. Anyway, I got you. That's all I care.
This is what I was talking about earlier, with movie studios not understanding how the magic is made by those rare, special talents who bring the character to life. There have been some great voice actors portraying Optimus Prime over the years. They aren't Prime. Peter Cullen is Prime. And if I was in charge of Hasbro, I'd give him first right of refusal for any project that had Prime in it. Prime has meant so much to so many, and it's wonderful to see how much he meant to Peter Cullen as well. I'm sorry the company that owns the intellectual property of the character looks at it as, well, an intellectual property, and not a very special piece of Peter Cullen's legacy. He already went through that with Disney and Eeyore, and I hope he's treated with the utmost respect in regards to Optimus Prime for the rest of his days. Thank you, Mr. Cullen, for giving Optimus Prime his soul. Regardless of the status of the studio and the paycheck, you will indeed always have us, and that's more important than money. Number 7, Harrison Ford, Indiana Jones. It's pretty clear that Harrison Ford isn't very sentimental about Han Solo, and that's a shame since he means so much to so many people, but it's a bit easier to digest since he's basically being Han about it. Laconic, aloof, all about the money. But it really warms my heart to see the crotchety old Mr. Ford light up like a kid at Christmas when he's talking about Henry Jones Jr. Indy isn't that far off from the character of Han Solo, but the major difference is that Mr. Ford wants to be there on an Indy movie. He's having fun, and that's an intangible you'll pick up on subsequent viewings. Indy has a lot more soul than Solo. Who could possibly ever put the fedora on when Ford is gone?
Nobody. I'm Indiana Jones.
So when you're gone, it's
When
gone.
I'm gone, he's gone.
Exactly. He belongs in a museum. The best anyone will ever do is a great impression. Although, I would be up for an Anthony and Gruber Indiana Jones movie. It would be like a deepfake, but with an actual living person. Number 8, Ian McKellen, Gandalf the Grey. The thought of Ian McKellen's Gandalf just makes me smile. Like a hug from a grandpa, which I especially appreciate since I didn't have one. A calming force from an ancient being who has literally seen the darkest days that have ever transpired. Smiles a sly, tired smile and reassures, "Don't worry. Everything will be all right. It always has been." We're so lucky we got to see him 3 more times in the Hobbit trilogy. The actor on the Rings of Power has a big hat to fill, and hopefully he doesn't stray too far from the fun, playful, and wizened portrayal of McKellen by saying, well, he's a younger version of himself. I think we all know what Gandalf would do, regardless of his age. So hopefully there's someone working on that show who isn't afraid to speak up and say, Gandalf wouldn't do that. And if there's any doubt, maybe they should have Mr. McKellen's number handy, just in case to confirm. I think he's earned that courtesy. Number 9, Brandon Lee, Eric Draven, from The Crow. This one is different. I've never done a review for The Crow, and I don't think I ever can, because it's not a movie to me. It's a grave. Brandon Lee was tragically killed while filming The Crow in 1993, in the scene where his character Eric Draven was being murdered. A year later, the film was released. The scene where Eric Draven crawls up out of a grave 1 year after his death is eerie, since Brandon's final days on Earth were being brought back with it 1 year later. I've talked about how certain actors become one with their role, are inseparable, regardless of what a copyright or trademark lawyer believes. Brandon Lee took the role of Eric Draven to the grave with him. The movie studio tastelessly tried to cash in on the movie's success with a few sequels, but at least had the decency to not recast the character of Eric Draven. Not in the films, anyways. There was a TV show with Mark Dacascos which was pretty good, and Mark was good too, but only because he was an echo of Brandon Lee. There was talk about a reboot with Jason Momoa as Eric Draven, but that project seems to have fallen apart. I don't normally celebrate when a project fails, but The Crow is very different than a typical reboot. A young man died. From what I can tell, he was a very good man. Thoughtful, intelligent, introspective, empathetic, inspiring. All this in addition to losing his own father at a very young age. The Crow is a property that's laced with tragedy and sorrow. Like a cemetery, all should proceed with respect and somberness around it. This is not an opportunity to make a buck. As my father always told me, the dead have paid their dues. Find another way to make a profit. I'm hoping that the makers of The Iron Claw proceed with this level of reverence and respect for what the Von Erichs endured. Treat it like you would a gravestone, and if that's too constraining, then find something else, because the dead have paid their dues. Number 10, Jim Henson, Kermit the Frog. The best Kermits are simply good impressions of Jim Henson. They keep trying, but no one can get it perfect because Kermit was Mr. Henson.
Now we've got wrong-sounding Muppets! Yay!
Steve Whitmire accepted the role after Mr. Henson's death, and he had a lot of respect and reverence for what he was being asked to do. He didn't want to do it at first, which made him a pretty good candidate, because he knew it wasn't just a role, it was a memory, a legacy that he'd be custodian of. It's an absolute travesty how he was sacked and the role was passed down to a new performer like it was nothing more than a trademarked intellectual property. Mr. Whitmire knew how much all the Muppet characters meant to Mr. Henson and the original Muppeteers and tried to preserve that level of heart and soul. But the problem is Hollywood is all about suits with no soul, making a lot of money off of very soulful people who would prefer to dress comfortably. I don't really have much else to say about Kermit other than he's Jim Henson. Hopeful, optimistic, caring, lovely, just one of the nicest people there ever was, and not motivated purely by profit, working in an industry that's usually purely motivated by profit. I think Mr. Henson made it clear which master he served. Ever wonder why the Sesame Street Muppets aren't included with the Disney Muppets? It's because Jim Henson gave the rights in perpetuity to the Children's Television Workshop, the production company of Sesame Street, to ensure their survival as a non-profit educational show. So yeah, this ain't no typical frog to be recast and rebooted. It's a major piece of Jim Henson, and always will be. And some honorable mentions: Chris Hemsworth as Thor, Chris Evans as Captain America, John Bernthal as the perfect Punisher, Mel Gibson as Mad Max, John Irwin as He-Man, Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, Peter Weller as RoboCop, Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool, Mark Hamill as Luke Skywalker, Frank Welker as Megatron, Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken, and Kurt Russell as Jack Burton, Tobey Maguire as Peter Parker, Willem Dafoe as the Green Goblin, Heath Ledger as the Joker, with all due respect to Jack Nicholson and Mark Hamill, and the original Star Trek crew. All of them. You can enjoy the reboots, but they'll always be homages to the ones who boldly went where no one had gone before. That's my list of characters who can never be recast. Share some of your perfect castings forever and ever below. Tap the like to give this vid a spike. Give it a share on your social square. And to join the tribe, hit subscribe. Nerdmas stay.